My name is Bergen Streetman. I'm the assistant director at Trinity University Press, and I wanted to thank everybody for coming to the Maverick Book Club, which is a quarterly event series exploring rich stories of Texas. Even though we've been doing this series online and off since 2019, this is a recent partnership with Texas Public Radio to try and bring it to a bigger audience in San Antonio. So I thank you so much for coming. I thank Texas Public Radio, Bobby Salus, Tori Poole, Yvette Benavides, and the rest of the team at Texas Public Radio for making this happen. Extra special thanks to Trinity University's Humanities Collective, who co-sponsored tonight. As a nonprofit cultural and educational publisher, Trinity University Press is committed to an evolving agenda of work that engages, questions, and brings us together collectively as a community. And we hope that you find that here tonight. Every time you come to an event like this, every time you buy a Trinity University Press book, every time you donate to Texas Public Radio, you are giving back to local nonprofits that literally would not be here without your support. So everybody give yourselves a round of applause for coming out for the community. So tonight we brought together a few of the poets from our new poetry collection, anthology, Texas Being a State of Poems. These are poems that are about and around Texas. Some of the poets are from Texas, some of the poets are not from Texas, but it's really an exploration of Texas as a brutal and beautiful state. We'll be discussing writing about place, we'll be talking about writing about Texas, we'll be talking about writing about things that change minds in these times that we're living in. So this is a really beautiful and diverse collection that was put together by Trinity University professor and poet Jenny Browne. Tonight we also welcome Christopher Carmona, Naomi Shihab Nye, Andrea Vocab Sanderson, and it's moderated by Yvette Benavides down here. Yvette is a professor of English and creative writing at Our Lady of the Lake University. She is a contributing editor with Texas Public Radio. She hosts TPR's Book Public podcast and co-hosts The Lonely Voice with Peter Orner. She is also an editor-at-large at Trinity University Press. And before I introduce her and our conversation begin, I want to point out that putting your soul on paper for the world to see is not an easy task. Despite real-life hope crushers and inner critics, all of these artists here give a damn enough to write from their heart. So let's give all of them and the other 47 poets in the collection a big round of applause. If you haven't gotten a copy of the book yet, we are selling them out in the lobby. We hope that you'll come back again for the next Maverick Book Club, which will be on August 21st, with David Martin Davies in conversation with Joe Hawley, who is a Houston Chronicle columnist and also the author of our forthcoming Native Texan. That said, thanks again to Texas Public Radio. Thanks to Jenny and Naomi and Christopher and Vocab, and thank all of you for coming. And now I'm going to hand it off to Yvette.
Thank you, Bergen. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Bergen. Before we start, though, I'd like to acknowledge the passing of Carlos Alvarez yesterday. He was a longtime TPR supporter. He and his family moved to San Antonio from Mexico in the 1980s when he established the Gambrinus Company, the driving force behind the launch of Corona beer and its phenomenal popularity in the U.S. Today, Gambrinus is a leading U.S. craft brewery with several brands, including Shiner. In 2018, Mr. Alvarez donated $2 million to the Capital Campaign for TPR's headquarters. It is the largest single gift TPR has ever received, and this theater is named for Carlos and his wife Malu in acknowledgement of that gift. When he announced this donation, he said that he wanted TPR to have a space to convene community conversations and host educational, civic, and cultural programming. So tonight I hope that we can honor Mr. Alvarez and make him proud. I'm sure we will. And I also want to add that the last time I moderated a literary event in this space, Joyce Slocum introduced me, and I felt so honored. And after she introduced me, she handed me her notes and said, "This is what I said about you," because I was back there with Luis Alberto Urrea. And she was a book lover, and she was a Texan, and she loved Texas. And I know she would have loved this book, and I know that she would be so happy about this turnout today. So thank you all for being here. I want to introduce the poets. You know, I was at the San Antonio Book Festival last year, and at one of the sessions, somebody said, "Oh, don't read the bios, it takes too long." And one of the authors said, "No, we need to read the bios. They're important." And this goes along with what Bergen said about, you know, it takes a lot to put your heart on the page. And so please indulge me, and we'll read these bios to you. First of all, Andrea Vocab Sanderson is a San Antonio native and poet laureate emeritus of San Antonio. Her dynamic style is a fusion of poetry, hip-hop, and R&B. She is a teaching artist who enjoys facilitating workshops all over the nation. Some of her awards include Dream Voice 2018, awarded by the Dream Week Commission, the Arts and Letters Award 2020, Impact Award 2023 for contributions to the arts, awarded by the Carver, Best Local Poet 2023 and 2021 by the San Antonio Current. In 2021, she received an Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellowship for her legacy project called the Echo Project, which was featured on KLRN. Vocab's debut book, She Lives in Music, was published by Flower Song Press, and her albums are available for streaming on all music platforms. In 2022 and 2023, she received a Creation Funds grant from National Performance Network for her forthcoming theater production with Lubana Alcantar, entitled The Seasoned Woman. May 3rd. May 3rd, a production co-commissioned by the Carver and Art to Action. If you want to learn more about Vocab, go to AndreaVocabSanderson.com. Thanks so much for being here, Vocab. You're awesome. Jenny Browne is a professor of English and creative writing at Trinity University. Her most recent poetry collection is Fellow Travelers, New and Selected Poems. Her poems and essays have appeared most recently in the American Poetry Review, the Oxford American Poetry, The Nation, and the New York Times. She served concurrent terms as the 2016-2018 through 2018 Poet Laureate of San Antonio and the 2017 Poet Laureate of the State of Texas. And she was the 2019 through 20 Distinguished Fulbright Scholar at the Seamus Heaney Center in Belfast, Northern Ireland. She was inducted into the Texas Institute of Letters in 2023. Naomi Shihab Nye is an award-winning poet and essayist. Writing from her position as a Palestinian American, her work shares a myriad of influences from her work in education for 50 years, her travels, and her strong belief in shared humanity. Naomi Nye has been a Lannan Fellow, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a Witter-Binner Fellow from the Library of Congress, along with other honors, including the Ivan Sandorf Award from the National Book Critics Circle and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Texas Institute of Letters. And today she's a professor of creative writing at Texas State. Christopher Carmona is the author of El Rinche, The Ghost Ranger of the Rio Grande, which was a finalist for the 2019 Best Young Adult Novel for the Texas Institute of Letters, and The Road to Llorona Park, which won the 2016 Knox, Texas Best Fiction Award and was listed as one of the top 8 Latinx books in 2016 by NBC News. He has 3 books of poetry, 140 Twitter poems, I Have Always Been Here, and Beat. He co-edited The Beat Estate in the Union, an anthology of Beat Texas writings with Chuck Taylor and Rob Johnson, and Outrage, a protest anthology about injustice in a post-9/11 world with Rossi Evelyn Lima. He's also co-written Nuevas Voces Poéticas, a dialogue about new Chicana poetics. Currently, he's working on the El Rinche series of novels, and book 2 is out now. And he is my colleague at Our Lady of the Lake University. He's a professor there. So I have to follow the script, or I'll just be all over the map. So please forgive me for flipping through these pages. But we're going to start with a Q&A and discussion, and then we'll open it up to questions. And I do ask that if you have a question, you go to the mic, because we are recording this. And we want to make sure to hear your question. So, but first of all, let's start at the very beginning. Jenny Browne. I would really like to start with your reading of the poem Texas Bean. And then I'm going to ask you a question on the other side.
So yeah, this is the first poem in the book. And as you might have gathered, the title of the anthology is taken from it. And it was the first poem I remember writing when I moved to Texas, and I think the funny part of the story is I was driving from the Midwest, and I crossed the state line. I thought I'm home, and I still had a long way to go. So, yeah, it's a poem of images gathered together. Texas Bean, where blind catfish cruise limestone caverns. From deeper we drink, while a man sweets tea with his knife, stirring all the way down. Border fires, making breathing a geography, mountain cedar, floating pollen fevers, bones in the road, sun-bleached possum grin, just missing the curb, where she, like all the modern girls, paused to consider her inventory of elsewhere. Because we can drive 10 hours and somehow still be here.
Love it. Thank you. We should clap. Yes.
It's a fun poem to read.
So, Jenny, this was the seedbed for this collection of poems.
Yeah, it ended up being so in a funny way. Yeah.
So, Texas is a very complicated place, as you know, and you undertook this, curating this collection, and we see place depicted so variously across the poems in this book, the good and the bad. How do you decide what to include in the poetry about the state of Texas, a state that is so fraught, where the poems emerge from Native voices, from people who have experienced discrimination, violence, trans and queer people, immigrants, people of color. It's a difficult and a challenging state, but I want you to tell us how you considered the complications and the complexity of the state of Texas as you worked on the project to curate the poems and have what is alchemy, right? I mean, it's a
great
beautiful
word.
collection.
Yeah, thank you. As I was sitting thinking a little bit about today and about this book, and I just returned I'm teaching in Northern Ireland this semester, and so I hadn't actually held the book in my hand. And I was thinking, there's this funny thing that's been happening everywhere I go in Ireland. People are really crazy about the new Beyonce song. So everywhere I walk, it's like, this ain't Texas, everywhere I go. And so, they really like their country music. So, but I've been thinking about that. This ain't Texas. Like, what isn't Texas was one of the questions that I think I brought to this, and who gets to decide? And what I mean by that is, to my thinking, we don't do ourselves a lot of favors in some ways in terms of, stereotypes exist in some part because they're true. But at the same time, what it isn't is homogeneous or easily definable or simple. And so, so that was one sort of thing in my mind, was this question of what it isn't. I love this place. It's my home. But I was also thinking, I was in Marfa a couple of years ago, which some people might say both is and isn't Texas. That'd be one of those places. And I was with a friend who designed a house out of rammed earth, and the house wasn't occupied yet. And she had taken me out to see it, and we were just kind of walking around. And all of a sudden, I saw out of the corner of my eye someone standing in the shadow of a doorway, like in this house. There's not supposed to be anybody in this house. And I walked down, and it was like this teenage guy, this kid, and he starts talking, and he tells me this story that his girlfriend had kicked him out of a truck, and could he charge his phone, and did I have any water? And it was clear he'd come from somewhere, out of the desert. And then out of nowhere, or just all of a sudden, he said, "Is this Texas?" Like, and I was thinking about him too, like. He had this tone of fear and relief and awe and kind of disbelief, and he and I could not have more different encounters or exposures. I mean, I'm a white, middle-aged poetry professor, right, who came here because I wanted to, but at the same time, how might both of our worlds be represented and worlds beyond them? And so, I don't know. I mean, those are stories, but I think, they were the ones that I sort of took into this, into asking people whose poems I already loved, into looking to history, into trying to find new, really diverse voices, and also trusting that poetry has the capacity to hold complexity. Poetry itself, complexity of emotion, how strange it is just to live in a body. And, as poet laureate, I was very interested in Texas as landscape. And so, there are celebrations of the immense beauty here and interrogations, of the brutality in the ways that this place isn't hospitable in the most basic sense. So, there's a line from a Rosemary Katakolis poem in here. I was kind of looking through these, and it says, "Try telling him about borders, that someday you'll look across the distance, and sure enough, the big things are closer, the small things farther away." And that's what a poem can do too, is like take something small and show how cosmic it is, or take something really big and make it intimate. I've probably talked too long about this, but I'm quite proud, and I want to thank Bergen Streetman, who came into my office and had this little idea, a little seed, and said, "Hey, what do you think?" And also gave me the creative license and freedom to kind of make it something that felt true to me. So thanks, Bergen, and thanks for that question.
Well, when I consider Texas poems, and I think about the way poems depict place and displacement and even annihilation, right? The literary critics write about annihilation and displacement when we talk about writing about place. And I think about Lucille Clifton's poem, Jasper, Texas, 1998, which she dedicated to James Byrd, who was brutally lynched in Jasper, Texas in 1998. And that's such an extreme example of this idea a place that's not hospitable, a place that's brutal, a place that's difficult. But poetry has this powerful capacity, as you said, Jenny, to evoke a particular place, to inform us of the meaning of the place that can go beyond, the worst of it. So I feel also like with Texas, we can consider the composite whole, right? Not just the discrete parts and the terrible things, but the composite whole too. The poems in this collection are set in Palestine and Lubbock and Uvalde and the border and all places in between. So there's more to say than just, one thing, the synecdoche of the whole thing. No, it's the composite whole. Bell Hooks said that identity is firmly rooted in a place, even one that might not be whole. So this idea of isolation and displacement, yes, but writing about place, as you know, and there are many, many examples in this book, can also be a celebration. And you said it yourself, Jenny, this is your home. This is your home. And it is a place we love for all of its flaws. Sometimes with a measure of nostalgia. Bono, the great Irish Bono, says in one song by U2, we glorify the past when the future dries up. Well, I think sometimes it's okay just to say we glorify the past and we look back with nostalgia. But I think sometimes, even though it's an acceptance that is hard-won, there's still love. There's still connection. So I want to ask Vocab a question about finding inspiration in home, in San Antonio. I know you draw a lot of inspiration from our city. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that before you read Rosary Beads.
Sure. So much of, because I was born here, military brat, I was born in Wolford Hall, and my dad was Air Force. So much of my identity here was shaped from the lens of, the whole idea of military USA, right? Growing up and seeing so many people transplant here from other places and find culture, find home, view it as a place to raise their family, and even if they get assigned somewhere else, they come back here or they try to stay here. And I've had the pleasure of living on the south side, the west side, and the northeast side, and now I'm kind of north central-ish. And everybody's like, you're from the east side, right? I'm like, no, I'm black, but I'm not from the east side. I'm from the northeast side. Get it together. And so I went to an agricultural high school. So we had horses in the back, and I mean the idea of being a city girl, but also understanding the roots of being country. And talking to people from certain sides of town, I'm like, where the heck did you get that twang from? My God, how did you? And then when I start talking, I hear the twang in my voice. I'm like, here we go. Yeah, and the people making fun of me from when I go, oh my God, I went up north, and this guy, we got on his little ferry boat, and he was taking us across the water, and he started making fun of me because of the way I was talking, and I was like, huh? But just, you don't realize the signature parts of your identity sometimes until you're outside of your home, and then you start to love it. And when I leave home is when I love home the most. And so coming back here is just, getting off the plane and just being in the San Antonio International Airport. I swear we have the smallest airport in the whole freaking world. But it's so cute, though, and I think that, it's ours, and that's the funny part about San Antonio. It's huge, but it's small. And we all know that country feel in a big city. We get it, and how people kind of laugh at us, even though we're the 7th largest city. They like laugh at us because certain things we should have because we're such a big city, but we just don't have it. And we're not even trying to be pretentious like these other big stuffy cities. We're just being ourselves. So, I guess the idea of the hominess, the familiarity, the warmth. I don't go anywhere in this city where I don't feel like I'm home. And it feels comfortable everywhere I go. And even if I feel like I might not know where I am, I still feel like I do. And that's my inspiration.
I love it. Thank you. Will you read Rosary Beads?
I will. The awkward moment where I flip to the page. Y'all talk amongst yourselves. I was like, it's 60-something. Yeah, 65. And now I will switch into poet voice for you all. Rosary beads. I have no rosary beads to rub in supplication to the patron saint of lost things, but I offer this psalm to a risen king in the thanks for my city. My city, San Antonio, is gathered here like hands clasping together in prayer, and song from the tip-top of a needlepoint towering heights above our heads to the basin of the blue hole that still babbles the hollowed words of Yanawana. We are a fiercely loving city, tougher on the outside but smooth as pecan shells.
Yvette, I can't help it. You referenced Lucille Clifton as one of my favorite poets, and I was just thinking of my favorite teeny tiny Clifton poem. And when you were talking about being country, the title is "Why Some People Be Mad at Me Sometimes," and the whole poem is, "They ask me to remember their memories, but I keep on remembering mine." And that just feels also true to this book in this sense of there also are things that people want you to say and think and believe about Texas, a version that makes people comfortable. And one of the things I really love about even what you're saying, you're supposed to be this, you're supposed to live here. And I hope this book insists that actually these are all stories with authority of their own experience, or poems with authority of their own experience. Sorry, a little Clifton there, I couldn't help it.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for adding that. I like that Vocab thinks the San Antonio International Airport is cute. I'm always going to remember that. It's cute. Well, question for all, anybody, please feel free to answer. On the importance of poetry now, today. So Matthew Zapruder, whose poem appears in this collection, and may be the last poem in the collection, in his book about writing and reading poetry, the book is called Why Poetry, says this in Why Poetry: the experience of getting closer to the unsayable and feeling it, and how we are brought to that place beyond words by words themselves. That, he says, is the usefulness of poetry. And he says it has less to do with delivering messages, he says parenthetically, which we can just as easily get from prose, and far more to do with what poems can do to our language, re-enlivening and reactivating it, and thereby drawing us into a different form of attention and awareness. That's Matthew Zapruder. So I was thinking about this, and I wonder, what do you think about this idea, this usefulness of poetry, an answer to his question, why poetry? And within his questioning, he also asks, this is a big one, I'm sorry, do with the question what you will. Does poetry have political and social uses? Is that its usefulness, he asks, and then he goes on. That's a big, very broad question, but I wonder if there's anything you can choose from this long, meandering prompt.
Jenny keeps looking at me. I'll do anything Jenny says. I love Matthew Zapruder's work and him, and I think poetry carries us into an intimacy, a closeness, a care, that feeling, that breath when you get back in the San Antonio airport and you say, okay, I know where to go. I know what to do. I know where the door is. There's a feeling of connection with and a gravity in poetry where we're offered the tiny things of other people's lives and noticing. Like I think of that sweetened tea in Jenny's poem and the crunching of the pecan shells in your poem. And so these tiny things that we know, that we care about, that create the texture of our lives. And we live in a time when so much is being obliterated through a lack of love or respect for lives that all people treasure and human beings who, love their table as much as we love our desk or windowsill. So there's a need, and to me that is very political. There's a need for a language which cherishes and which respects the experience of another person. So I think it's crucially important that people read poems right now, and when there's a place in the world you're not feeling close to or worried about, or the headlines are breaking your heart, try to find some voices speaking with care about real life in that place. Do you want to say something to that too?
Sure. So that question about the poetry, importance of poetry and political. So years ago when I was speaking with Helena Maria Villamontes, and she said she gets asked that question a lot, and she never had an answer until she did a reading at Virginia Tech, or she was going to do a reading at Virginia Tech, and it was when she was there that the shooting happened, the mass shooting occurred. And so she was thinking of canceling the reading. And the organizers who were students says, no, this is when we need it the most. And so what she did instead is she turned it into an open mic. So basically anybody and everybody could go up there and kind of speak there. And she says that after that point she knew why poetry is important, is because it's in those moments that people can express themselves in a way that's within everybody. And then so that's something that poetry can do that, no other art form can, because everybody's got a poem in them, is what she says. So that's what I would say to that. That wasn't me, that was, but I was just borrowing it from her.
I do. So you feel free to use it, or you might think it's stupid, but every open mic that I go to, every slam I go to, I call it the Church of the Uninvited, because I feel like poets are people who a lot of times feel like they're outside societal lines and they've been rejected. We're all traumatized, as poets, and we bleed onto these pages. That's just what we do. And so we're, sometimes the social rejects, and we're all gathering into these places because we want a good word. The gospel according to so-and-so, whomever so-and-so is on the list to perform. So that's why I call it the Church of the Uninvited. But I think that every poem by default, especially if you're in America, is political because it's your freedom of speech. So every single poem, you're taking that license to write something, whatever it may be.
I'm going to misquote William Carlos Williams here, but he has that. Is it Williams? I think it is. I could be wrong. I'm a little jet lagged, but there is someone, an important poet, who talks about that you won't get the news from poetry, but people die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. And I think, whether it is community, whether it's the recognition of another normal human life. Naomi, you have a poem that has a broom in it, and somewhere in that poem, it's one of the poems I love the most, but it just makes that statement that being able to live a normal, dignified human life and sweep your floor is a politically charged act, and if part of what poetry's job is to name that, so someone else can recognize it and recognize themselves. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Naomi, you used the word connection when you gave your response about Matthew Zapruder's quote. Perhaps with your poem, Texas Remedy, there's a poem about connectedness and hope that Texas can also represent. It was Leon Stokesbury, who's a poet from Oklahoma, who said that Southern poems include, quote, a big dose of heartbreak and comic sensibility featuring family, landscape, and religion. He said, it has to mean more than just living here. And I recall another poetry anthology, one titled, Is This Forever or What?, that you edited and it was published in 2004.
Hard to believe.
It is hard to believe. You published the poems of 140 poets in that book. And I was thinking that even though that book was for all audiences, including a younger audience, that there might be something to say about Texas just the same, and the way that you still hang on to hope 20 years on, even in 2024. It's not an easy thing, as you know, in our world today. But I think that the poet can speak the hard truth and point to hope in it. And I know that you do that.
Oh, thank you, Yvette. And thanks for mentioning that book. It was another Texas anthology that included paintings by Texas painters. And I love that book. If you can get a used copy anywhere, buy it, order it, because it's still, to me, just a precious gathering of Texas voices, and so much fun it was to put it together. And I wanted to celebrate this state and all the various experiences growing up here. I did specifically ask people to send poems, of love and affection for Texas, but also poems about their growing up experiences. And I didn't grow up first here, so I'm not a native Texan. Came here as a high school student. My parents quite randomly picked Texas. We were fleeing the 6-Day War in Jerusalem, and they didn't want to go back to where they had moved there from. So Texas became like this spacious possibility, and maybe it could welcome them too. And I remember they were very impressed hearing about Hemisphere, this global fair getting ready to happen in San Antonio, and I think they prided themselves on being global. So they thought, sounds like a good place to go. I'm fascinated by how Texas, of all the states, seems to have more stereotypical opinions about it. When you travel both elsewhere in the U.S. or out of country, people will either have certain positive impressions of what Texas has to offer, or very negative ones. And I've never experienced that about another state in quite the same way. But I always, bank on that spaciousness that, Texas is a huge mixture of many things, but we have the spacious sky, the spacious horizon, so much land, so many miles between things, and room for everybody, which is what I always want to emphasize. Walking over here, I'm quite in love with the path along the San Pedro Creek from my neighborhood to walking over here to Texas Public Radio. I was haunted tonight just thinking about all the voices that we are charged to remember now. All our friend poets of San Antonio 10 years ago, or when I made that anthology, so many more people were here, and I miss them so much. And so Texas Remedy, my poem in Jenny's book, is about loss and about our curative. And I think Texas does have a lot of curative power in its very nature. There's a lot we may not like here, and I refer to that in the poem. I often say to people who are acting ugly about Texas elsewhere, well, I'm not hanging out with the state government. Those are not my best friends. There's a lot of other people. You can hang out with them. So, Texas remedy. Step outside at twilight. This sky won't wait. Crushed wrapper blowing down the street. Release what snares you. Then go chase that trash. Answer rising egret with your own breath. Yes, it's terrible, but the sky still looms larger than any place you ever called home. Remember what a door was for, letting in people you love, swinging wide still when no one is there and little recognized. Now it's the wind's turn. In Texas, always a wide chill coming to change the sky before the ground. Be patient. Sure, there's lots of bad around, but more room for good, too, with all this empty. Goats that don't freeze, thirsty rivers, Ozona, Electra, and Alice, bearing their own sorrows and staggering joys. Blow a kiss to the far-off town of your first real job. Longview. Pretend it branded you. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. Well, the southern part of Texas has a very complicated story for Mexican Americans. And we also see a few poems in this collection that deal with this fact. So, Christopher, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what your poetry can illustrate to us about this reality at the Texas-Mexico border. Is a very particular place, a very important place for us to consider in the larger story of Texas and in the larger story of the United States.
So, thank you, Yvette. And so that's that's the question, right? We talk about place. So, I grew up, right on the border, Donna, Texas, which if anybody knows where that is. Lived, 7 miles from the river, most of, growing up there. And so it's, it's a very different world than most people think it is. And of course, it's not the world that people depict on the news or are usually written about. But it's its own world. I mean, Lorenzo Dua called La Frontera for a reason, right? It's a mixture of things, right? It's a mixture of cultures that creates its own, right? And so I grew up there. And so, I think like a lot of people, and then what Vocab was saying, you don't really recognize it until you're gone. And it wasn't until I left the valley when I was, young that's when I started to really understand how different a world it is, right? And it's not. Then so the world is, you have the mixture and you have the history. So, the history, my history is different than but it's the history of a lot of different people. Where my family has been in that area for 300 years. So when we start talking about immigration, I don't know what that means. There's the famous line in Chicano, right? The Chicanos have the border crossed us. The border crossed my family 6 times. So, immigration's a whole different thing for you, right? Immigration is Stephen F. Austin and them. Those are the first wetbacks, right? So we I have this perspective when we start to get out, especially when I was at Texas A&M, College Station, very different world, right? And you start to realize how like special the border is, right? And then people who live there, it's just home, right? But the history's there, a mixture of a lot of violence and a lot of things that come from that area. But there's also a culture that's created. A lot of voices came, a lot of writers come from the border. Marco Paredes, Orlando Hinojosa. We can go down the list of a lot of writers who came from that area. And they all have various different ways of looking at it. But, the mixture of lots of different things, the lives of, it's always politicized. It's always been politicized, right? Every 4 years, it gets really politicized. And then go back to doing what we usually do. But I think a lot of it is that, right? So so when we start talking about what is a reflection, I think it's starting to see the world. You have to kind of leave it and see it from afar before you can really appreciate it. And so that's, for me, that's what it is, right? It's all it's in everything I write, right? To see it from that, and also to realize how much ingrained and how much is in me.
Would you read your poem?
Sure. So this one actually is actually about when this poem came about, because I was going to a poetry festival called Forest Fest out in La Mesa, Texas, which is in the middle of nowhere. If y'all know where that is, it's smack dab in the middle of West Texas, right? And so I was there with a friend of mine, Chuck Taylor, and we were driving up there. And we were at a gas station, and at the gas station, there's this truck pulling, this trailer filled with horses. And I thought and I was looking at that, thinking that is the weirdest thing, that transportation is pulling transportation, right? But that's like a Texas thing, if you think about it. Because then right across the street was a guy on a horse going through the drive-through line of a Burger King. So I was like, this is Texas, right? So this one in here is called Something About Texas. There's something about Texas rolling through these towns, preserved like a gift shop postcard. I feel the slowness of time, the bustle of a town on the brink of decay, like a Larry McMurtry novel. The only constant is the single Mexican restaurant where all the trucks gather.
Thank you, Chris. Well, we just experienced the solar eclipse on Monday. And I've been thinking about the book by Nina Polari. The title of the book is Path of Totality. It's from Soft Skull Press, came out in 2022. The Path of Totality. She's a poet and also a Finnish translator who experienced the unthinkable, the unimaginable, the death of her baby daughter. One of the reviews of the book when it first came out included this: when language begins to fail, Polari does not fall silent but moves into a startling metaphorical knowledge. And I was thinking about this, this ritual spectatorship of the solar eclipse with everybody looking up. I saw so many photos that day of people looking up, right? It's so beautiful, looking up together, everybody looking up together. So as happens when I read a lot of different things at the same time, I start to conflate them in my head. And so I was thinking about The Path of Totality by Nina Polari, and I was thinking about Texas being a state of poems, and the eclipse. And I thought that Texas reflects this unique landscape of loss It is a space, as you know, that is full of grief. So the path of totality. In one of the poems, Polari talks about the death of her daughter being complete and total darkness. And then the sunflower became the symbol to represent how she remembered her daughter. And she talked in an interview about taking this huge sunflower. There's actually a poem about it too in the book. A huge sunflower into her grief support group, and being able to talk about her daughter. But there is a kind of hope in that idea of the sunflower. But within this wide range of grief and hope, there are such distinct facets of longing and yearning and wanting to survive and wanting to keep living and keep going. And we can think about this thin, precarious space between grief and hope and our need to keep going and march toward our own fate. So from there, I started thinking about Emily Winnicker's Uvalde poem in this collection. This is a poem where the speaker is a mother who's driving through Uvalde with her child and recalling her childhood driving through Uvalde. And it was such a carefree time. And then realizing that Uvalde has changed. And her own child, who's sitting in the car driving through Uvalde will be a completely different space for her. So I wonder if somebody would like to read that poem. Would you, Jenny?
I think I'm correct in saying that this poem was first published in the Texas Observer. Yes. Naomi Nye, who's been editing that for how many years now?
But not anymore.
Not anymore?
No.
Okay, sorry.
28 years.
28 years. And, it has been a magazine that has been publishing not just poems
got a
about
new
Texas.
poetry
but,
editor. Yeah.
But yeah, just to pick up on what Yvette said, I think a poem, does kind of hold the oneness of time and how this poem can both hold one relationship and one understanding of a place and be in motion with it and future at the same time is pretty extraordinary. Uvalde. What I remember of Uvalde is their debate team. A girl with a snakeskin briefcase. The name, a jewel in the mouth like others, Guadalupe, Bandera. Redolent of sky, space, heat, the sense of a journey, roads turning and turning. What I saw when I looked out the window of the car was an example in landscape form of all I could do and be. I rarely thought about my parents' gun, zipped in its holster, invariably locked in a glove box. Sometimes when I was scared at night, listening to the wind or coyotes, I considered its uselessness. Other people kept their guns close at hand or hunted. We ate their venison in hunting season. Guns were far from my mind when I decided to come back, pregnant with you, after years living on either coast. People would say, Texas? Doesn't everybody have a gun? No, I laughed, not everybody. What I thought about when I thought about home was wildflowers, rampaging across the land in spring, about fishing in shallow bays. I thought Uvalde would be a name you knew from the stories I told of the girl with the snakeskin briefcase. Or maybe you would know it from driving country roads, stopping for tacos. I hoped you would watch the sky the hills as I had and contemplate the possibilities. Instead, Uvalde will mean something else to you. It won't feel like a creek-polished stone when you say it. Uvalde, once a place, now an everlasting trigger like the others. We'll drive west in a week's time, as we do when summer starts, across the coastal plains, climbing gradually into the hills. We'll watch the clouds, darting, shape-shifting, like children playing tag, their shadows mingling on the ground below.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you imagine this particular group, and we're here and we get to listen to these folks? Well, I wonder if there are any questions from the audience. Would anybody like to come up and ask a question? Or a comment? Comment would be good too.
I'll ask a question.
All right.
So I'm a native Texan. I always kind of hated it because I thought I hated our racism, our sexism, our image, and I left. And I think a couple of comments about when you leave your place and then you, what's that line about you go, Elliot has, about you leave and you come back to the place to know for the first time. So I kind of want y'all to comment a little bit about, even if you weren't from Texas, you've been here a long, long time, and a couple of y'all are, obviously I know Chris well. So what is the motivation that made you love Texas in the way you do?
So what is the motivation that makes you love Texas the way you do and keep coming back?
I've always lived here, so I think it needs to be somebody who's left here.
All right, I guess I'll start here.
Your friend.
Yes. Thank you, Ken. So what brings you back? There's that song, right? It's the hook that brings you back. Well, I mean, a lot of it does is that this is my home. Mm-hmm. And this is my family's home. And this is, you know, for all the stuff that's out there, I think that, you know, we're talking about this at, you know, especially Naomi was saying, we don't hang out with those. There's a lot of great people here.
Yeah.
That's actually what makes the state, right? It's
Yeah.
not the politics and all that other stuff.
Right.
But, you know, the people on this panel, right? They're speaking their voices and their truth. There's that is Texas, I think, that we have, and this kind of, and so for me, you know, that's what it is, I think, and it's a home. It's a home. It's, you know, I mean, just like family, right? You're gonna have things you hate about it and things you love about it, but it is us, right? It is who we are. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, as you were saying that, I guess it occurred to me, like, I don't know, I mean, maybe this is a depressing thing to say, but I don't know that I know true beauty without knowing ugliness, or I don't know that I know, you know, true happiness without knowing despair, or that those things feel starker and more felt when they are up against each other, and that is something that I feel like is part of my experience of this place. You know, and I think the attention, I mean, the people too. I mean, just, yeah, the people, the mountains. I mean, I love the diversity in the biggest sense. I love the birds. I love the creatures, you know. Yeah. I just came back. I've been living, like I said, in Ireland, which is so dramatic in all of these other ways. But, you know, just this morning, the air, you know, the ocotillos blooming outside my mom's condo, I just went, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I mean, so there are things about that are familiar, and I know them and they're mine, and then to kind of, for them to become strange again in seeing them. And that's available to people anywhere, but I think the things that are here
are ours.
Well, back in the 1950s, Jack Kerouac said San Antonio had the softest air of any place he had ever traveled. And I just love that quote. I'd say the friendships, the sense of gravity, the Alameda Cafe right down the street here, the plants all year long, the ability to be outside all year long, most of the year, and last summer was a challenge. But just the beauty, the mixtures, and Jenny mentioned the Texas Observer, for which I did work for so many years, and I wrote my farewell piece to them was about being a public poet in Texas for almost 50 years. And one thing I said in the piece was my first job out of college, out of Trinity, was going for the Texas Commission on the Arts to all these little towns. My first posting was Longview. And I never in all these years have met any place in Texas where poetry didn't live. I mean, last summer on the beach at Galveston with the most mixed group of potential poetry writers I have ever seen in my life, under a tent, and the wind was blowing and it was 104. And it was the most incredible day ever. And because I got out there that morning and I thought, well, this could be the day. This could be the day where poetry doesn't live. But no, it lived so strongly there that by the end of the day, we had taken over the stage where the musicians played all day, and it was for the poets because it was so great. So it's everywhere, you know. It's everywhere, and the voices, and just that sense of gravity. I think Texas has a very, very powerful gravity and sense of possibility and mixture.
I'd like to have a chance to answer that question.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go over there.
Okay. Betty Ward returns to Texas also. Yay for the great artist, Betty Ward. We're so happy you're here. Yes.
Yeah, I was one of the artists included in Naomi's book that she wrote. Such a pleasure, such an honor. I brought my dog because she loves poetry. Today I had a really amazing experience because Phil Hardberger gave me a tour of Phil Hardberger Park. And it was in a wonderful golf cart. And he talked the whole time. And one of the things he said, which really touched me, was that they have this wonderful area. I mean, well, first of all, you're looking at Texas landscape. I mean, the authentic, if that is a word that can be still used, Texas landscape that I saw as a child. And I rode horses. I was a horseback rider. And I grew up on a ranch. And I rode my horses over all of this kind of landscape like I saw today. And I mean, I jumped over the logs and I went through there and I put my head down and the blog came over and, you know, all of those things. And that's the way it was there at Hardberger Park. And then he said, when we came to this this clearing, he said, we made this clearing on purpose because a long time ago, when horses would walk through these clearings, there was grasses that would come up to their belly. And that was the authentic way of going through a pasture where you felt the grasses coming up on you as you're riding your horse across. I mean, it was the most wonderful experience. And the butterflies, there were thousands of butterflies, and we saw a roly-poly bug, which I haven't seen in a really long time. And, you know, lizards and all kinds of Texas plants. And, well, anyway, I just thought that that was a really good thing that can bring you back to Texas's nature and its really authentic beauty of the state.
I think now every time I reread this book, I'm going to remember. I'm going to decide that that was in the book too. Thank you. Well, Texas being a state of poems, we have not even scratched the surface. I hope you get to read all of the poems in this incredible book. Thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening. Thank you very much.